Hi, welcome to the Red Tunic Podcast, a podcast where I look to rediscover what makes gaming fun and enjoyable by having a positive conversation with those related to the industry. My name is Link, and today I'm joined by David Bocek, Senior Game Designer at Gravity Well, currently working on an unannounced title, and having previously contributed to Apex Legends, Destiny, and other games. Hi David, how are you doing today?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for asking. As well, David, I want to thank you so much for making time to have this conversation with me, especially on your weekend, your time off.
No, of course. Thank you.
So, David, if you don't mind, before we get started, maybe telling me and your listeners or whomever a little bit about yourself, so we have a better idea of who you are.
Sure. Quick background game-wise. I'm 28, so I'm still a young babby. But in games industry terms, I've been in the industry, I think, about 6 years, maybe a little more now. I might be coming up on 7. I don't really remember, honestly. No, it's coming up on 7. Oh my goodness. COVID ruined all the time. But so yeah, I've been in the industry for about 7 years, which is longer for the industry, even though it's not that long for most industries. But games career durations can be a little more fickle depending on the person, certain situations. But I went to school for computer science and like a comparative media studies, blah blah blah, media stuff. And then I always really loved games. As a kid, I'm sure you get that a lot. But once I realized, hey, programming I can kind of do, I decided to try and make it a real job. And then I've been fortunate enough to work as a game designer out of school. I worked at Bungie for about 3 years on Destiny 2, doing AI design mostly. So I worked a bunch on the new, the Red Legion and the new enemy faction updates and stuff like that. And then I went to Respawn, and I was there for about 3 years as well. I joined a few months before the launch of Apex, and then about midway through season 2, I jumped on to Apex full time. We had the old weapon designer had put in his 2 weeks, so I jumped in and ran the weapons ship for a couple years there. A little less than eventually other people joined on. We got help and stuff like that. But yeah, and now I'm over at Gravity Well with some folks that I knew from Respawn and some new folks, and it's a real small team. We're real early, but new game coming out sometime in the next however many years.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's always great to hear. That's always interesting to me. What you worked on at Apex. I only say it that way because I am interested in AI. I think as many, a lot of people are interested in AI because everyone has experienced it in games they've played and what they've encountered and good AI, bad AI, and all that. So I'm not diminishing that when I'm about to say what I'm interested or what interests me a lot is the working for like weapon design and such for Apex Legends. And one of the things I'm curious about, when you say that, do you mean you were working on the like the designs, like the physical designs of them, or do you mean like the meta design, like the damage or how they function? Sorry, I don't know how to phrase that properly.
No, for sure. I don't know how to phrase it. It's hard to describe game design and what I did. So I can be more specific to Respawn. Every studio is different. Like there are different titles. There's game designers and there's programmers and all that stuff. But who does what really depends a lot on how the individual studio culture is set up. At Respawn, there were just design scripters. At somewhere like Bungie, which was a much larger studio, I was specifically an combatants designer, AI designer. I worked on a team with a bunch of other people who worked on the AI with me from all the different disciplines. At Respawn, we were split up into sort of our disciplines, so I was on a team with all the designers, although I worked a ton with all the other people too. At Respawn, designers are generally pretty technical, or expected to be pretty technical. So a lot of the work that gets done involves not just collecting ideas and parsing ideas and filtering ideas and trying to figure out what would be good, and then also implementing those ideas. So writing the script or working with an engineer or artists, sort of coordinating all the different departments that need to get done to make a thing exist. At the end of the day, we called it sort of ownership, quote unquote, which is in general, when creating things, it can help to just kind of have like a final point of like someone's in charge of it. When you have, oh, it's a group thing, it can be easy to just kind of, no one wants to be the one to make the decision. So at Respawn, the designers were often the owners of a feature. So at the end of the day, how it comes out to players, and if players enjoy it, if they have a good time, and however they interact with it, that's your responsibility. So my job as a weapons designer involved, implementing and working with the new weapons, going to all the meetings and talking with art, with, code, with sound, and just making sure everything was going to be good. And a lot of times that's just me getting to sit in on meetings where the artists show a bunch of cool concepts and I just go, those look pretty sick, and they talk about it. But sometimes I'm there for stuff like, oh, this looks like it's going to kind of block the sight line. We don't want to. You're sort of there just being an advocate for the player experience all the time. So I worked on new weapons. I also worked on. I was the only weapons designer, so I sort of just owned anything related to weapons for a bit there. So new weapons, meta changes, updated ammo, moving weapons in and out of the crates, and then meta changes, so balance updates, number tweaks, any of that sort of stuff was just under my umbrella. And then I did a little bit of extra stuff for various like loot things. One of the great things about Respawn is everyone's sort of just working towards making the whole better. So there's no like, no, you're in that lane, you're not allowed to touch other things. So we would hang out and talk a lot at the office, and me and Colors would just be like, oh hey, I think that the gold backpack being the thing that gives you more healing is really rough because you can't tell when someone has it. So maybe it should be on the armor. And then because we had the technical tools at our hand, I could just go make that happen. So it's a bit of a long-winded answer because the job really does bounce around all over the place. But ultimately, it's being in charge of the player experience and making sure that at the end of the day, what comes out works well when it gets into players' hands.
So that's really cool. So thank you for explaining all of that. And one of the things that if you don't mind me following up a little bit or picking your brain a little bit more on, when it comes to that, like, I'm not asking for specific examples or what have you, but just because you worked on that, can you speak to a little about the mindset that would go into like how you would look at a weapon and like figure out how it's gonna balance out? Because I know like for fighting games or like for MOBAs or whatnot, there needs to be a little bit of a give and take to keep other gods or other player characters or what have you like in balance, so that way you don't so you don't intentionally create a meta or a system where one thing is going to be the absolute end all and just be the only thing that anyone does. And I say intentionally because there's always systems in play that sometimes you just accidentally do something, and then a group of players go, oh, hey, if we do this and this in conjunction with this is broken, that, right? And then you're like, oh crap. But can you speak a little to that? Just because this is I've always been curious about it, and I've never had a chance to talk to someone about that kind of mindset.
Yeah, it's definitely. I was pretty new to like live game balance stuff. I had done balance stuff on Destiny, but when I worked on Destiny, we worked for a few years, and then Destiny 2 released. It was a big box product. That's a different world than live service, games as a service, sort of constantly putting out updates. And also PvP versus PvE is a big difference. It seems obvious, but it's super, super true that PvP. I'm trying to think about how to sort of like tackle the broader question of balance. In general, you want people to, be able to play and have a good time, but you sort of have this permanent struggle where, and this isn't a knock against players, this is just human nature. We feel like stuff is fair if we're winning like 70-ish% of the time. That's like the human brain's like, yeah, this seems pretty all right. Like, obviously we want to win. That's a thing. Losing feels bad. PvP is really great because you get just so much depth and interaction with players versus each other. But that also means anything you're going to put in that is fun to use and cool, you have to think about what it feels like to have it used on you, right? And so balance, a lot of the time, one of the main concerns you brought up is avoiding what we would call like first order optimal strategies, or basically this is the correct thing to do. There's no interesting decisions around it. It's just super strong. So obviously there are cases like that where you're trying to avoid letting a weapon just be too strong and then everyone's using it and you just don't have any sort of interesting gameplay there. And in a game like Apex, which has randomized loot and you can't just pick something, it's even scarier when something is strong because the loot aspect is a bit random. And Apex, being a battle royale that is trying to have more competitive heart to it, leads to some struggles because the idea of competitive integrity is like better players should be able to win or at least express their skill and so on and so forth. So you really don't want stuff where it's like, they randomly got the really good gun and I didn't, so I lost. Something that's really important with balance and just with AI, with anything, is that perception and feeling is really what matters. At the end of the day, it's all about trying to give players a good time playing this game. Numerically, players don't care if, well, technically the number percentages, blah, blah, this wins, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? A lot of times you'll see that where it's like, this weapon isn't too strong in terms of like numerical. Is it winning too much? Is it killing too many people in gunfights of this weapon versus other weapons? Does it win too much? But the experience, the emotional experience people have against the weapon is just so negative that sometimes you need to address that problem, even if numerically it's not that strong. An example of that is in Season 3, we had the charge rifle, which was this hit scan laser beam weapon, and I sort of jumped on right around as that was finishing up. So I was there for the launch, but not really the creation of it. But when it came out, it was not super strong numerically. It didn't have a particularly high win rate. It didn't get a particularly high number of downs, but people were really frustrated by it. And so a lot of the times balance is not just about, make the numbers even or, adjust a concern here or there. It's trying to understand how something fits into a game and different experiences and what you want from the game and sort of make those two match up. A lot of the times, the question isn't so much should we nerf this, should we buff this, it's how. I can go into more detail here. I don't want to be too over the top, but so when we talk about skill differentials, for example, right, there's a lot of times where certain weapons or heroes or whatever you're talking about, whatever game, how good the relative players are can make a big difference on how effective those characters are. For example, you may have weapons like the Kraber in Apex, which is this, single shot sniper rifle. It's a one-shot headshot, but it's intentionally pretty hard to hit. The ballistics of the projectile are pretty slow. It drops a lot. At lower levels, this thing isn't really a problem. It's a really fun moment when you get it and you try and take the shot. It doesn't happen too much. It's cool. But if you look at pro levels, those players are so good that they pick it up and it's just, 8 free kills. And it can be difficult to sort of balance things in that sort of situation. There are weapons like different aspects of a weapon may impact how well it works in different areas. For example, an LMG, the Spitfire. If I'm using too much specific Apex lingo, I'm sorry, but there's a LMG in Apex, and it always has been, called the Spitfire, and it has a really big magazine. That's its advantage. How quickly it downs players if you were to hit every shot isn't as fast as like an AR or an SMG. So at higher levels, that gun's not particularly great because those players are hitting all their shots, and being able to kill someone 0.2 seconds faster is a really big deal. Those TTK evaluations, big deal. But if you look at lower levels where people are missing more of their shots, the fact that it kills a little bit slower at the theoretical fastest doesn't really matter that much. But the fact that it has a big magazine means the other person has to reload once they've missed their shots, and you don't. So that's a huge advantage. So you kind of, certain elements affect certain skill brackets or player types more or less. So when we talk about like balancing, looking at something that exists there's a lot of those considerations. It's very, very rare that something is just purely good or bad universally. That's something that I think you see a lot. People talk about on Reddit and stuff. It's like, oh, I can't believe they haven't nerfed this gun. It's like, well, notice that for you and your friends, you're at one very narrow piece of the pie, but we have to try and consider the whole spectrum of millions of people, and that can be a bit, you're never going to have a perfect win. You're never going to have the exact correct answer. So it's all about trying to like mitigate and touch the right areas without affecting the wrong areas. And it's sort of a floaty black art that I don't know if I would say I'm amazing at, but certainly tried my best.
So thank you for explaining all that. And I never thought about it in the way you were explaining. Having to balance the it's not just a numbers games, and that's how I kind of always thought about it. For any games I've played, whether it's some of the battle royals I've tried, some like the MOBAs or what have you, but I never thought of it beyond just the numbers game. And hearing the psychology, so to say, I don't know if that's the exact right word,
Mm-hmm.
behind it, and how you want to balance not only the numbers, but you also have to balance the way the person using it is feeling, the way the person having it used on them is feeling, having just the broad spectrum of it. I never considered that, and I never really thought of it. All that extra stuff that goes into it, and I'm fairly positive that you gave a very broad stroke, and it could be much finer detail. And I think that's really important to know that it isn't just numbers. It isn't just going, well, this gun's going to have higher DPS, we have to lower it, or like you mentioned with the sniper rifle, where the lower level players, when you get it, it's not so much whether or not they get the kill with it, but the psychology of knowing they can get the kill with it, and the extra amount of fun that they might get just getting to rattle off some of those bullets. Is it going to be a completely different psychology or experience or what have you for someone that is a much better player, higher ranked or
Yeah.
whatever quantifiable terms you want to use, how they're going to just, like you said, it's just 8 or whatever free kills. Like,
Yeah.
that's a very different kind of thing. For them, it's like, oh, here's my time to get some kills and move on. Whereas someone like me would be like, here's my time to, fire the howitzer and see what happens a few times.
Yeah,
right?
make this, because it's awesome to have those. You want those moments. It's great. You're playing with your friends, like, all right, I'm gonna try it, and you get 3 kills. Whether you win or lose that round, that feels so awesome. And the numbers matter a lot, but the numbers are more of a like lens through which to view how the situation is. Out of people that go on Reddit and Twitter and people who sort of talk about the game online that you can just sort of look and read, that's a really, really tiny percentage of a game's population that plays the game. It's easy because it's all you see to sort of think about it as like the game's community is what you read on any social media, but really it's not. That's such a tiny portion of the players. So you need the data to help understand what all those players who don't go talk on the internet are feeling and seeing and thinking, and like what they're experiencing. When you're talking about millions of people, it's just impossible to sort of guess at every situation or imagine every situation. So you need the numbers for that. But at the end, those numbers are just another way to look at the data. But at the end of the game, like I said, your game isn't good if the numbers are even. You know what I mean? And your game isn't bad if the numbers aren't even. It's about the player experience. We play games to play the game, not to have a 50% win rate.
Exactly. And, thank you for putting all that in perspective. And, hopefully, if anyone that's listening to this has ever been annoyed by it or perplexed by it, I would hope to be the more positive side of it, just being perplexed. Hopefully that helps, because it definitely helped me. And, thank you for helping me better understand just the whole mindset behind it.
Oh, of course, I get mad at. Don't worry, I get frustrated by balance stuff too. It makes sense. I think it's totally fair to say this is my experience. They're making a change that doesn't help my experience, and that's frustrating. That's gonna happen when you're talking about games of millions of players. Sometimes you are not like the target of a change, and it's just not really for you, and that feels crappy. And it's totally fine to feel crappy. It's just that next step of like, you know, I'm sure they have their intentions, whatever. It's easy to think like, ah, well, maybe it helps someone, but I'm not saying don't be upset when your character gets nerfed, even though you're already struggling with them. That's a totally understandable situation.
Yeah, exactly. Now, David, I do want to ask this, and you kind of touched on it a little earlier. Um, but would you mind, explaining or speaking to how you got into developing and making games, and maybe based on the experiences that you've had and went through, if there's any advice that you can share based on, how you got from point A to point B?
Sure. I had, fiddled around with little like mods and all that sort of stuff when I was younger, but honestly, I didn't really get into it super seriously until college. Um, I think it's important to call that out because I think a lot of times everyone's like, "Oh, I've been doing it since I was 6 years old," and it can kind of feel like, if you're someone who's 30 or older, you'd be like, I kind of missed the boat. But really, it's not true. I've especially in game design, I've seen people from all sorts of backgrounds. The background I had isn't too uncommon, which is I went to school originally for chemical engineering was what I wanted to do because, sure. But then I always really wanted to make games. I had to take a programming course. I had never really known how to program. I was always really bad at it. But then when I kind of did it in school, it helped me understand it better. Just I had the right teaching environment for how I learned personally. And I was like, oh, maybe I can make this game thing work. I did a couple internships in games, engineering internships. And that was when I realized I didn't really want to be an engineer full time. And so I just spent a lot of time in my junior and senior year just working on projects on the side, trying to build a portfolio. And then honestly, I was really lucky to get the position at Bungie. They were hiring a bunch of people at the right time when I applied. It's the first job is always the hardest. It's you kind of just got to have someone take a chance on you and get lucky. And then I sort of have just gone from there. Once you have your first job, you're just sort of, as long as you're constantly learning and improving. But like I said, never be discouraged when you hear a bunch of people say, oh, I want to do this when I was younger. Even some people, I think commonly everyone's like, oh, I've played games since I was younger, and I definitely have. But my manager at Bungie, he started his games career. He worked, I think, in construction for a while. He didn't start his game career until way later, but he was an excellent designer, super good person. Like, people join from all walks of life, and that's something that's really cool about it, is all of that different perspective and all of those different experiences help a ton when designing and building things. Something that I think people have a mistaken sort of view on game design is that design is about like coming up with ideas and thinking of what should be in the game. And honestly, having ideas is not really the super important part. It's the sort of saying is that like ideas are cheap. Ideas are not really that valuable. Execution is everything. And that doesn't mean ideas aren't, but it's just having ideas purely by themselves doesn't matter. Everyone has ideas. Everyone has tons of ideas. Everyone's thinking about stuff. So your job as a designer is less to be the one that generates the ideas and more to sort of get the ideas from everywhere, from the team, from yourself, from your friends, from the world, and sort of filter them and squeeze them and shape them so that there's something that fits together with the rest of the game. I don't know. I sort of went on that tangent there, but
No, and that's thank you. That's great. And yeah, that's something I've definitely heard before. That ideas are cheap, and I'm not gonna lie. I'm well aware of that. And I think a lot of people. Sorry, that was a little dismissive when I said I'm well aware of that.
no, 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 no.
But no, I mean that I've heard that lots. That's not news to me, but it's always nice to hear that said more, because there's lots of people, and I I don't mean to be kind of like clipping people's wings or dreams or what have you, but we all know someone that has said, oh, I have this great idea for a video game. I'm gonna go into do game design, and I'm just gonna be the idea man. And it's like, well, if all you're bringing to the table is guys, why not Skyrim but with bombs? Like
Yeah.
that's not really an idea. That's just you saying something and then sitting there waiting, expecting a bag of money to fall into your lap. Like, you know, it's the ideas are cheap, like you said, and it's amusing and nice to always just hear that because. Like I said, we all know someone, whether it be family, be friends, or what have you that has just made a very similar pitch, and they're like, yeah, I'm going to get rich off this idea, and you're like, okay, well, best of luck to you. I hope that works out for you. Like you don't want to be too mean, but at the same time you're like, I can't say anything else to you because there's nothing else to say right now.
Yeah, but having ideas is doesn't mean don't have ideas. It just means respect that making the idea is the hard part and where it really comes down to it. But part of the reason that having all those people from different backgrounds is great is you get ideas from all sorts of backgrounds. You know what I mean? You get stuff when you take sort of an idea or an object and then everyone together starts looking at it and like, but what about this? What about that? Sometimes I have, our animator is super into, like martial arts movies and old Hong Kong, cinema, and he's got this super awesome idea for like how the, character could do this cool move, and someone else is into some other, they think about things differently. They have this different, like, that's where a lot of the magic comes in. It's like all these different people having these different, ideas and directions, and you kind of mold that weird spiky clay ball into something that hopefully turns out well.
Exactly, yeah, because like you said, from all walks of life, and when you have everyone coming from all walks of life, it's all the accumulative experience and their interests and everything that's ultimately it's going to go into the pot, and it's going to get boiled. And really weird analogy, but at the end of the day, you're going to have this weird soup that works, right? Like you'll have things that you wouldn't think would work, but just that one thing that someone throws in there is just like the extra amount of salt that it needed, or what have you. Sorry, that's a really awkward analogy.
No, it's honestly the way you put it too, where it's like it kind of, you get something, and honestly sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but that's why I think like the underlying reason that games are such an iterative process is it's so complex to try and imagine how someone will play with something and how they'll feel about it and how they'll look at it, that you can have ideas and you can have thoughts on how it's going to work, but until it's in people until it's in people's hands, you just don't know. The saying is like, no idea survives the first playtest, because as soon as you get the idea of how people are actually going to play it and hold it and feel about it and what they're going to look at, you realize where your assumptions are and what works and what doesn't. And so a lot of the times, especially the first thing that you slap together is not going to be super great. And so it's all about making it and looking at it and thinking about it and changing it and iterating on it. And so when we talk about, how do I get into games, that's the skill that you just can't, you just need the experience. You can't really fake it, but you don't need to get that experience from working at a professional studio necessarily. Whenever I'm looking at newer designers, newer engineers, whatever, people talk about the portfolio, but that's really such a big part of it. It's, you will learn so much more from making anything, especially your first couple things. You're going to learn so much more from that than you'll learn reading, any number of articles or books or watching videos. That stuff is all great, but until you have the context of what it's like, it doesn't stick as well. It doesn't quite get to the nuance that you need. So really, it's that, make the thing and put it in people's hands and let them play it and watch them play it and don't say anything. And you'll learn so much more about how games work by making a thing and giving it to your friend, not telling them anything about it, and you don't say anything, and then watch what they do, and your preconceived notions of how everything was going to work come falling apart, and then you rebuild, and then someone touches it and breaks it again, and you rebuild, and you keep doing that until hopefully it comes out and it's, people like it. It's funny how rarely, like before Apex came out, we didn't know. It's really weird to not know if something is good or bad or how it's going to do. And you can have ideas like, we think this is pretty good. Bigger companies will run tests with groups of people and have like mock-up scores and guesses at how well something is going to do, but it's all guesses. Like we thought Apex was cool, we thought people might like it. No one ever expected how big it exploded, but it could have just as easily came out and no one noticed and it died, and that would have seemed just as reasonable. It's really hard to predict that kind of stuff. So whenever a game comes out, you're always crossing your fingers, holding your breath, hoping for the best. Then there are games like, Destiny are just really huge games. You can have this stuff where there's so many giant pieces working, and then like they have to come together at the end. And sometimes it comes together at the end, and you go, "Uh-oh, those pieces really don't work real well together, but we don't have any time to do anything about it. So we're gonna mitigate it as best as we can and put it out." So making things is hard, movies, music, anything. Anyone will tell you, like, sometimes you make things and they turn out well. Sometimes you got to take shots in the dark and they miss and they don't turn out so well. But that's just the name of the game. You got to just keep making stuff.
Again, that is also great advice. So thank you for that.
Of course.
Now, David, I do kind of want to wind it back just a little.
Yeah, please.
You
I'm going all over.
No, that's absolutely fine. And that's not really. I should really. I really got to fix how I transition from question A to question B, because I realize now it can be really confusing. When I say I want to wind it back, I mean I kind of want to wow. I kind of want to wind it back several years and ask maybe what was your favorite game in your younger years as a child, and what about that game is it that makes it your favorite?
Oh, that's a great question. It's so hard to pick from disparate stuff. I have a number of games that I remember very fondly and I know made a big effect on me. Um, it's hard to say, favorite or whatever. So I'll say, I always really liked horror games. Silent Hill 2 is currently my quote unquote favorite game. It's hard to compare genres and stuff, but I always liked that story stuff. When I was a kid, I loved, Zelda series. I had the Nintendo consoles growing up, so I played the Zeldas and the Marios and loved all those. And I still enjoy that stuff a lot. I still play all the Zeldas. It's a great time. Compared to like stuff that I can directly relate to stuff that drove me as what I wanted to make personally. Because sometimes you can like a thing and not want to, experiencing a game or a movie and making something is different, right? I love, horror games and narrative games, but I don't think I'd be any good at making them. I don't really have a desire to make them. But I played a ton of multiplayer shooters when I was in, middle school, high school. A ton of Call of Duty 2, 4, Modern Warfare 2, the Battlefields, the sort of typical, not the most niche, but I definitely played a lot of those online shooter things. And so I think just that drive for like second to second gameplay and game feel and all that sort of stuff really stuck with me. And that's the stuff that I'm super interested in as a developer these days. It's stuff that I really like.
Well, that's cool. Thank you for sharing that. As someone that I think kind of might have also, I grew up in the era. I'm 34, so I'm a little older than you. However, when I was younger, like a lot of those games were just starting out, like the Call of Duty series, the Battlefield series. There's one more that I'm really I'm forgetting, and Medal of Honors. There we go. Right. All of those games were just starting to come out, and I can definitely relate to spending a lot of time playing them and playing them online, and like you said, like the second to second gameplay about how, the whole like the deathmatch scene or whatever was, how it was already established prior to, but like the military quote unquote sim games were coming out, and that's so that was I can definitely relate and understand that, getting into that and just being able to enjoy the variances and learning from that, for what works for you or what you enjoy and all that fun stuff, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, going back, I never had an Xbox and stuff. My parents were scared by all the newspapers talking about how Halo was the most violent, scary thing ever, which is funny because you go back and play Halo and it's like shooting colorful aliens, and it's like I don't get why this was the scary game. Like, it's funny, but I love any of those kind of things. Halo was great. I played old GoldenEye and 64 was great. Just that I've always enjoyed shooters and first person stuff, not necessarily for any penchant towards the military angle, but just something about that sort of gameplay has always noodled its way into my brain in just the right way.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I can relate to that. And speaking of Halo, I'm recently trying to play them. I did not grow up with an Xbox. I was, more Nintendo and then Sony. So
Mhm.
I didn't really get a chance to play, the Halo series when it first came out, and I'm replaying it now, like through the Master Chief Collection or whatnot. And well, there's much that could be said about Halo. I think from me, horror or scary or whatever is definitely not one of them. So that would a really interesting ad read that they would have taken back then when it came out, to scare people, or not scare, sorry, to
Yeah.
dissuade parents from letting their kids play it, because I can't think of a moment in that game so far in the series where I've actually felt any form of dread or 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 terror or what have you. It's mostly just been, you know, point the gun at what's in front of me and click, right?
I think it was part of it is like, this was the Halo was the rise of multiplayer. You know what I mean? Multiplayer shooters. Before that, things were single player, and you had maybe couch co-op. You play with your friends, but the idea of bringing your Xboxes over and playing together, or later on, playing over the internet, was this new thing. And I think whenever there's a bunch of new stuff the kids are doing, there's going to be a certain subsection of adults who are like, oh no, this is, you know, before Halo, before video games were rotting the children's mind, it was TV, and then it was movies, and then it was book. You go back far enough, it's these books or newspapers are ruining the minds of the youth. As things change, there's always some resistance to it, but this is how it goes.
You got to blame the radio dramas. They really kind of
Yeah,
started the problem, and it never got better.
I forgot better. Our poor youth.
so so David, you kind of might have touched on this, and I might just not picked up on it, so my apologies. But what is it about games or gaming what is it that makes that kind of stuff enjoyable to you?
Uh, that's a great question. I also, you know, love movies and other media and all that stuff too. The thing that games do is the interactive thing, right? And that's the sort of obvious high level what makes games different. But I think, trying to think of if I have like an actual reasonable answer. I think the way we interact with stuff that we're doing versus stuff that we're sort of passively consuming is different in the way, your brain works and the way that it feels. And there's something about games that, just for the way that my brain is wired, that trying to execute on a thing and physically interact with it and get better at it and improve and get faster and all that sort of stuff was always super super exciting and enjoyable. And I've loved playing things forever. You can get a little too, I don't want to go too far in the weeds, but this concept of why do we play things in general. Even before we had video games, we play sports, we play board games, we play stuff. Animals play. You have a cat or a dog and they want to play and do stuff. And I think there's something, I don't know if it's just evolutionary or what, but there's something wired in there that just makes that so enjoyable. Something that I've seen compared in some ways, mostly just at the high level. But if you think about like playing an instrument, there's something about trying to master this thing that you're doing and practice it and get good at it. And then when you sort of reach this flow state of pushing yourself just hard enough to be challenged, but enough to do well, and you've improved at it, like it makes my happy brain happy. And so I've always been always been stuck to it.
And speaking of flow state, just because it's not something that I weirdly, it's not something that I hit a lot of when I play games. Thinking on it right now, I can actually, on like in on one hand, I think I can count the number of games that I actually can actively remember like flow state being in. So just because you mentioned it, and I'm curious, is there a game that you are really happy about the flow state in that you're able to achieve, and what game was that?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think competitive, or PvP, whether like when we say the word competitive, that these days can mean esports stuff, but when you're playing against another player and you're trying to win, you sort of get the free humans versus humans. You know, you'll never make an AI with as much depth as another player. And so when you're trying to win and the other person is trying to win and you're just pushing each other to the absolute max limit, that's always been places where I've found that sort of state. You know, multiplayer games where you're trying to get better and get better and get better at whatever sort of, you know, mastery of controlling your mouse or, you know, moving to the right spot, blah, blah, blah. In terms of like single player games, I am a big fan of the recent Doom games. Something about, for me, like Doom Eternal, just being able to, it's so 11 out of 10 all the time. You're just constantly trying to do things as fast as you can. And for me, that was super, super exhilarating, exciting. I loved that adrenaline rush. That was great. It's worth noting that flow state's sort of a line where it's just where your challenge and your skill are intersecting at the right levels. And so that can mean that for a number of people, Doom is too easy. No matter even on the hardest mode, it's just too easy. It's never going to really hit that level for them. Whereas on the other side, there are people who, you know, the playing a game like Doom Eternal or whatever is just too much, but they are in that flow state when they're playing, you know, Destiny or even older, simpler games or shooters. It just sort of depends on the individual person. You know, you can hit Tetris flow state for people. You can really, it's whatever clicks for you personally. And I think that's something that's so cool about it is everyone can sort of find their spot for it. It's something that I think a lot of people don't realize because, you know, we tend to surround ourselves with people that we have similar interests to. So me and all the people I know, we play games and we kind of have a general base gaming, you know, vocabulary and understanding of games have sort of over the years taught us the general stuff. But you'd be surprised if you put a controller in the hands of most people and said, hey, play this shooter. Like being able to move and aim and press the shoot button at the same time is a really big barrier for a lot of people. So there's a lot of games that don't feel like they have enough challenge for me, but for tons of people, it's, you know, oh man, it's you know, the highest level of engagement they can get to just because they have to do more brain work to figure out the buttons and stuff. And we did that I did that when I was a kid. I just was fortunate enough to start it however many, 15 years ago. So I've had more practice, but.
Yeah, exactly. And there's, I don't want to sit on one thing too much. I kind of want to just make a comment and move to the next thing real quick. However, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Sometimes, some games, the simple process of just saying, here's a controller, go at it, do the thing, and moving, aiming, and what have you is a little too much for them. Some of those people review games, and they get flamed for it. But anyway, moving on.
Yeah.
But no, it's just because you mentioned Doom Eternal, and that's actually one of the few games where I actively, personally, I actively acknowledge the fact that there was a flow state for me. And it wasn't until the learning curve when I started, my heart rate as it was going, or as I was playing, would be blasting at a constant 110, 120, right?
Yeah.
And that was, the learning, the balancing. And by the end of the game, I was doing the challenge levels or whatever they called them. I don't remember anymore. It's been a while. I was doing those with minimal thought, minimal effort, or what have you. And it's they're much harder. They're throwing much more things at you to juggle and everything. And the only time in those levels that my heart rate even spiked was when the Marauder, I think it's called, would show up.
Oh yeah.
And that was because I'm well, as a lot of people are probably well aware, if you hit them at the right moment, you can actually burn them down in 1-2 seconds, right? I never, no matter what, no matter all the attempts I did or what have you, I was never able to burn them down. I was never able to hit them in the perfect lock at that perfect 10.6 steps from them to hit them with X and then do Y and then Z. I could never do it. So no matter what, even on on the hardest difficulty, they were the only thing that would make my heartbeat, my rate or whatever, it would spike back to 120. But outside of that, no matter what, I would just, by the end of it, just constant 70, 80 maybe or whatever. And just you mentioning that, that's one of the few games where I personally had flow state and was able to go, oh hey, this is a thing, because it's not something I had happen or acknowledged happening a lot. And it's flow state's just a really interesting thing. I'm sure there's lots to be discussed on it, but I'm not equipped to do that. But I just wanted to mention that. Just wanted to mention it. That's all.
No, it's cool that you had the same experience. Marauder is such an interesting enemy in that way.
Yeah, and I think I don't know. Like, I've read this a few times, so I don't know when or where it started. And I really liked it that the way that Doom Eternal was described, it was kind of like chess, and that every enemy was a piece, and it moved in a certain way, and to deal with it, there was the optimal way of how to do it, and knowing when to keep juggling or not to juggle and engage on the next thing, because you've now basically crippled something, so it's not going to be a problem. And then the Marauder showing up was basically just flipping the chessboard around and going, okay, we're no longer playing chess, we're playing backgammon. But don't worry, we're still playing chess, but that's going to be backgammon, so figure that out. Or whatever other board game, a Mousetrap or something. And in my case, it actually was Mousetrap, because it was more at that point for me just being like, okay, you're over there. I'm gonna juggle everything else and hope that you get stuck in some weird crossfire. Well, everything else is being destroyed, because I don't want anything for me to, get bodied by or stumble or dash straight into while I'm trying to deal with the thing that is actually a pain for me.
Yeah.
Now, David, I don't want to take up too much more of your time on the weekend. Want to let you get back to enjoying what's left of it so you can continue relaxing before starting work tomorrow. However, I do want to ask, outside of games, outside of, making games or playing games or what have you, what other hobbies do you have? Like, what other things do you enjoy that helps you relax and that aren't just games?
Oh, this is gonna make me sound like a loser, but people ask this a lot, and I think it's very good to have a breadth of things that you enjoy and do all sorts of stuff. But unfortunately, when I look at me personally, my answer here is pretty kind of lame, which, like, I like hanging out with my roommate. He's my best friend. I love hanging out with my friends and stuff. But honestly, we're all so into video games, and I'm fortunate enough that I can get paid to do it. But I just love it enough. Like I said, it hits my brain just right there. I work on video games, and when I'm not working on video games, I like work on other video games or play video games. I really do spend most of my time doing video game stuff, which, like I said, is not, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. That's not the correct, thing. It happened to work for me just because the way my brain works. But, other media, I love looking at movies, TV shows, stupid YouTube content, all that sort of stuff is always fun. My roommate and I, we try and go out and we're in LA right now, and one of the advantages of LA is there's tons of different kinds of food, and one of the disadvantages is it takes forever to drive to any of it and come back. So a non-insignificant amount of time is spent like, oh, it'd be really cool if we went to this, whatever restaurant that's this cuisine that we haven't really had, and then it takes 45 minutes of traffic to get there and an hour of traffic to get back. So surprisingly, in terms of hours, weirdly enough, getting food can take up a good chunk of that. But
So what I'm really hearing is one of your hobbies is sitting in traffic. That's what you're really saying, right?
yeah, listening to music, you know what I mean. I think that's where the sitting in traffic we try and make into something. Listening to music, listening to. I have a couple podcasts I follow. I like to listen to on walks and stuff. I used to listen to on the drive to the work office, which isn't a thing anymore. But
So, with that in mind, then, because it sounds like, a lot of what you do to relax and such is going to be video games, and, not a bunch else. And, I'm not saying that in the way to be, diminishing that, that's, if that's what works for you, that's what works for you. And that's the important thing, right?
Yep.
But with that in mind, then, what do you have like a comfort game that you like playing then to help you relax, to help keep you away, or to take you away from everything and not worry about stuff?
I have a comfort game that I don't think is very comfortable, but I've probably played upwards of like 2,500 hours of League of Legends, which is like I know League is the internet punching bag, and with good reasons sometimes, and with unjustified reasons sometimes. But I think honestly, the answer is playing games with friends, like using games as sort of an excuse to socially interact and hang out with my friends. League has been one of those games forever. It was, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, or whatever. It was the game that my friends could play in college with their like not hyper gaming PCs or whatever, and I could play, and it was free. Everyone had it. So it just kind of became the game that we all played socially. I go back and play Destiny whenever the new expansions come out and play that. I have a hard time playing a ton of a game as I'm working on it. It feels too much like work. I'm too focused on all the little stuff. And there's also like if a new Destiny expansion came out and I was working on it, it's like I have seen this all, a million times. When I played through the Destiny 2 launch, it was like I had done a bunch of help with the person on the first mission, and I was like, if I never have to look at this first mission again in my life, it'll be too soon. But I enjoy, after being away for it for a couple years, I got to go back and play it. And Destiny's always been great for that social interaction too. Just to hang out, chat with my friends, click on heads and hear cool noises and look at pretty colors. And my brain is happy. So yeah, I've played a lot of League. Probably played a good amount of Destiny, and then otherwise I kind of jump around to whatever thing at the time. I tend to like stick onto something for 50 to 100 hours and then jump onto something else. There was this little JavaScript game called Vampire Survivors. It was I think you can play it for free on itch or something if you just Google it, but it's also on Steam for $3. Super well worth it. It's really simple, but something about it just grabbed my mind right. And so in the past few months I've played like 80 hours, and that's kind of my comfort game right now. And if you look at a screenshot, you'd understand what I mean, how simple it is, but it's very well done. It's a super fun game.
Yeah, and the just speaking of Vampire Survivors, I haven't played it yet. However, it was for me it was really interesting because I think like a week or two ago I saw just a bunch of people talking about it, and it was it absolutely blew my mind just because it was just like suddenly I didn't hear about it, and just suddenly now that's the only thing I'm seeing, or I'm seeing a bunch of people talk about it or what have you. And I just think that's really interesting how those kind of how the ebb and flow of certain things like that can just pop off and exist.
Yeah, we talk about it. I'm gonna say this, and it's gonna sound. I'm gonna talk about it in the way that like me and fellow designers and developers have talked about games of like not like Vampire Survivors, but games in general. And I don't want it to come across as negative, just because of the lack of connotation that we use it in. But something that we would describe a lot, when talking about Titanfall or other games, is this idea of like sugar in games. And sugar is like it's that real short snappy thing that just kind of short circuits your dopamine in your brain. You're just like, this is great. And sugary stuff is really awesome, and it's really catchy, and it's really sticky at first, and it's really easy to get other people into it. You love the sugar and you give it to other people and they have a taste and they're like, oh, this is great. Something that happens with sugary games or stuff, elements of games is sugary, is it tends to, you latch on really quick, you eat as much of it as you can in a super rad fashion, and then you're kind of just done. You know what I mean? You've kind of had your fill. You're like, all right, I've had about enough of this. So it's funny to hear about that, because Vampire Survivors for me was a game that I heard about at work a couple months ago when it first came out, and everyone was like all about it for a week, and then it was gone. You know what I mean? It's funny how it kind of moves through spaces, and someone finds it and it grabs them, and then they share it with their friends and it grabs all of them, and then if you talk to them in 3 weeks, no one's talking about it anymore. There's nothing wrong with that by any means, don't get me wrong. I think there, not every game needs to be a game that you play forever. It's totally fine to have a game that you play and you enjoy and you're done with, and that's great. But it's just interesting to think about games like that, because it's an interesting way to look at games when you're trying to make sort of long-term, live service type stuff. It's interesting to me as sort of a tangent, but like to think about like Battle Royale and a lot of these games that have been more successful. If you compare them to like old TDM, deathmatch, that sort of stuff, they're slower. Having more of that pacing and that time in between actually sticks people in the long term harder, even if it's not as immediately, gripping, because it's not as quote unquote sugary. Again, we use the word sugar, just I learned it from some Respawn folks. That's a word that we have, but it doesn't mean bad. It just means just the sort of way where it's really exciting and snappy at first, but kind of consumable.
And thank you so much, because that's what you said there. And I'm not speaking to to the Vampire Survivor or what have you in this case, because I haven't played it. I don't want to try and speak to something I haven't played or looked too much into. However, referring to like that element as sugar is fantastic, because there's certain games that I enjoy, that I play, and it's something that I'll play it for like 5 maybe 10 hours, and then I'm like, I need to uninstall this because I'm not actually enjoying it in the long, like in the grand scheme. I'm not enjoying it. There's too many things that are tipping the scale to not be enjoyable, but for whatever reason it's just so quick and so easy to jump into and have that dopamine hit and then just be on my way. And I can do it for a couple hours, and then at some point it's like, why am I doing this? It's sugar's bad for you. Now again, I'm not saying that's the case for all games, because some games the sugar is fine. You get your fill of it, like you said, and you move on. And in my case, some of those games are, I'll play them again and be like, why am I doing this? I need to stop. It's good games, bad games, like regardless, I say I need to stop. But like, that's that certain thing that I've not been able to coin, or to hear anyone coin. So thank you, because that's an amazing way to describe those things, and it's something I'm going to steal, or try to remember to steal in the future when I'm trying to talk about certain games. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. And by all means, I think that the secret that I've learned for me, and it may not be for everyone, but like, game companies and games are like obviously not going to say like, hey, stop playing, but under the hood, a lot of times they can be built to have jump off points and points where you can stop playing happily. So sometimes if you're like, man, I don't really want to play this game anymore, by all means, take a break and then come back to it later. That's how I keep playing League, because don't get me wrong, after I play it for a few months, I get frustrated and then I quit. And then a year later I come back, and you sort of, as you play something, the stuff that's really good and exciting kind of grabs you at first, and then you get kind of used to that, and you start noticing all the small little things that you really don't like, and those can start getting to you. So it's worth sometimes just taking a step back for a while and coming back, and then you'll re-find, oh, these are the reasons I like this in the first place. And that that's I think because of the way, especially games as a service tries to encourage people to sort of constantly be engaged and playing, it can feel like something is wrong if I want to stop playing this game, or something broke, or I'm doing it wrong. And sometimes the answer is no, it's totally fine. You know what I mean? By all means, take a break. It's your life, it's your time, it's your money and energy. Do things that you enjoy, and it doesn't do anyone any service to try and force yourself into stuff that you're not enjoying anymore.
Exactly. And that's also something that's important to remember, is that if you don't, I'm a hypocrite in this case, but if you're not enjoying something, you don't have to force yourself through, or it's fine to take a break and maybe hope that it'll be something you enjoy upon second visit or third visit, or what have you, right?
Yeah. And I'm horrible about it too, so easier said than done.
Exactly. Now, David, as I said a few moments ago, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. However, if there was anything else you want to discuss, a cool game that we might not have touched on, what you're working on. Now, I do know that that's a little, I'm not trying to trick you into anything there.
Oh, no, I know.
But if what you're doing, or something you feel just more people should be aware of, by all means, the floor is all yours. As well as, please let everyone know where they can find more information about you, which I'll also be including in the episode description.
Oh, sure, thanks. Oh god, I have a Twitter. I should be on it less. Twitter is another. It's like evil sugar. Social media is its own nightmare. But I'm on Twitter. I think I usually Amused Apricot is the name. I stream on Twitch on occasion and just kind of blab about random stuff. It's been a long time though. Oh gosh, let me think. Just kind of random. There's a lot of amazing, cool nonstop amazing cool games. A couple of my friends from Bungie formed this along with other people, formed this company called Polyarc. They make VR games. They made Moss, which is a really adorable, fun game where you play as Quill, who's a little mouse, and you kind of look in. You just look it up, whatever. But they just released the second one. Universally amazing reviews. Really, really group of talented people. Check it out if you're into VR. I get sick from VR a lot of the time, but I actually was able to play that game because it didn't involve too much of the stuff that kind of makes me sick. So would recommend that. Check it out. Oh gosh, let me think. Otherwise, I think at the end of the day, the thing I say is just like, games are really cool. Everyone who is making them is trying real hard, and everyone who's playing them is also trying real hard. And sometimes the way that the internet websites and mediums we use are designed, it's about engagement. It's about what gets attention, and they're often not really built very well for sort of back and forth nuanced conversation. You're kind of yelling into the void, and then any number of people can reply back or choose not to reply back. So it's a really difficult place to have like real discussion and back and forth. So sometimes I think if you look at the Reddits and the Twitters and the Facebook, the sort of social media sites of the world, you can see, man, there's this huge, animosity and fighting between developers and players. But I would say be aware that a lot of that is just that the way that the things are, what those websites are serving to you, what's getting attention, the way that they're built. But for me, in my life, just whenever I've had a Destiny shirt on or Apex shirt on, I've ever met anyone and talked with people in the real world, they've always been tremendous, fantastic, kind, understanding, listening. I've learned a lot from them. Hopefully I've been able to say things that help them too. So don't let the angriness of the internet dissuade you from, being excited and happy about this very cool medium and hobby. And I guess that's what I'm saying. Hold on to the positivity and the how you actually feel, and the stick with the stuff that's good and makes you happy, and don't worry too much about all of the sort of vitriol. It's really a small portion of everything. It's just amplified in some weird ways.
Yeah, yes. Thank you for saying that. And that's I personally I try I we discussed this before we started recording, or in a sense we kind of spun around this topic, and that's something that I strongly believe in everything you said. I personally I try to avoid talking about it, not because it's not something that I think is worth discussing, but because the amount of nuance that has to go into it, and I'm always worried where that kind of conversation will go. And I'm not saying this in the sense of going, oh, I'm annoyed that you brought this up or anything. I'm actually the opposite, because I agree with everything you said completely, and it's a real headache when you see the very vocal minority being where all the attention is going in terms of the focus on a game or on a genre or what have you. And it's not it's not just specific to one area. And I say that in the sense of you coming from Respawn, where the like I'm not gonna lie, a lot of before I figured out when I was trying to figure out how I wanted to do this podcast, when I was trying to figure out what kind of stuff I'd want to talk about and whatnot, it was right around the time a lot of the anger and vitriol around Apex was happening, where people on Reddit, on Twitter, or wherever, where we're throwing nonsense out, like this dev, or this this dev deserves to die because they nerfed my gun or something. And that's just nonsense. And it's not something I like to talk about a lot, because it's hard to try and put a positive spin on it like you did, and I thank you for the way you put that positive spin on it, because I think for me, and I'm worried that a lot of other people, it's just a dark rabbit hole that you don't want to go into, because what else can you say beyond screw those people? And that's me saying that. That's not you saying that. I want to be very clear on, that's my opinion. I'm not putting that on you because I don't want you to draw any ire for saying screw those people.
Yeah, the angry, yeah, I get you.
But like thank you for the way you put that, in that focus on the positive, focus on what you're feeling and how you're enjoying it, and not to focus on the clickbaity nature of what's going to get the most attention and get the most people into your whatever, so that way capitalistic revenue and all that nonsense just goes up, right? But no, thank you for that, because that's I strongly believe in it, and I'm happy when there's someone is able to articulate that and not end it on a negative note like I will tend to do. So thank you for putting the positive note on, enjoy what you enjoy, and not to get sucked into that black hole of negativity surrounding it.
Well, and thank you to you too. Doing talks like this is always, it helps have those two-way conversations that are so much more interesting. And by all means, it's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to be angry. And even a lot of these people that you see on the, it's like, those people. It's like a lot of times I can get the, when it can feel frustrating to feel like you can talk, but then your voice isn't being heard. And there's honestly, a lot of times you can have people who are super angry. And then as soon as, not even me personally, but like as soon as they actually get a chance to talk to someone, they're reasonable, normal people. They're just frustrated and angry and yelling into the void, and the other angry people are yelling into the void back, and it's just echoing against each other and getting louder and angrier. But the people aren't necessarily that loud or angry. It's just the way that, I won't go too much into it, but again, like it's the way that these platforms are built, and it's not, I guess that's just my point, is like people are, you don't have to be, I think sometimes it's like, oh, you can only ever be nice about things and only ever be positive. By all means, that doesn't have to be true, but just keep in mind that I think for the most part, people are not as the internet makes it seem. There are people, by all means, and there are people who are able to be very loud because of the internet, but there's also a lot of people who, we're all just getting through this crazy life, and games are weird and hard, and the world is weird and hard, and that's all right.
Exactly. And again, thank you for putting a positive spin on it in a way that I would have not been able to.
And that's the advantage of my business. I get to sometimes see these people or these kind of situations, but in the positive way that a lot of other players don't. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Hopefully that gives some warmth to the cold hearts, because I understand that too. But like I said, I've had lots of interactions online and in person with people who play games that I've worked on or games I haven't worked on, and almost universally it's been super positive. Of course, I'll say I'm a white dude. I get to avoid a lot of the grossest stuff, so don't take that to mean that there isn't bad stuff out there, but there's good people.
Yes,
everyone's doing their best.
Exactly. And far be it from me to touch the other thing, other than saying I know what you're saying. I think many people as well do. I am the least what's the word I want to say? I do not have any of the credentials to really dive into that. So by all means, not dismissing, just I understand, I agree, I ain't touching it.
Yeah, same. That's why I said, like, hey, this is my very limited.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, David, as I said before, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. However, if there is nothing else, I will let you get on with your Sunday afternoon.
Awesome. I mean, thank you so much for having me. Again, thank you so much for doing all the work and effort you do. It's certainly, like we said before, making anything is hard. Building things takes effort and time and energy and just putting a lot of yourself into it. So thank you for doing such a positive thing.
I thank you. Thank you for the kind words. Thank you for your kindness. I think that's the best thing that the best way I think I can and should put forward with that. But as well, a huge amount of thanks, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So thanks again, David, for making the time to have this conversation with me. And thank you for joining us on the Red Tunic podcast, as well as a special thanks to Ron Jenkins for the use of music from the title track from Road Steep. And if you like this podcast and want to help support it and help it grow, please subscribe or follow me on Twitter at Red Tunic Podcast to receive the latest episodes and news, and be sure to share with those you think might also enjoy it. Thanks, and until next time.